If your fantasy team is awful, you should be looking to buy these guys low. The first one's going to be CeeDee Lamb. There's going to be a lot of people that are like, what? Buy CeeDee low? Who's selling CeeDee low? Believe it or not, a lot of people are. In 2022, CeeDee Lamb, 28.7% target share. He was 9th in targets of the 156 targets. And in 2023 so far, he has a 24.5% target share. In his career, he has never averaged less than 13.6 fantasy points per game. That was in his rookie year. He's currently at 15.7. Last year, he was at 17.7. This is a Dallas offense that, with Mike McCarthy calling the plays, is going to pass the ball more. This is something we said all offseason. We still believe in Dak Prescott as a fantasy asset, and we absolutely have to believe in CeeDee Lamb because situationally, when you're looking at that offense, Brandon Cooks is a factor, but he's not going to steal targets away from CeeDee Lamb. Neither is Michael Gallup. Tony Pollard's going to get his own, but that happened last year as well. And so when you're looking at last year's production where he was close to 18 points per game, you've got to think that's going to be closer to how he'll finish this year. This year, he's been targeted 4, 13, and 7 times for 11, 25, and 10 points. He's been pretty underwhelming considering last year's production and where he averaged 9 targets a game, and he's had a game of 4 and 7 targets this year. But we do expect him to settle in around last year's production as the season progresses. This is more of a take by us in that we think that last year's CD was CD that is going to stay. There's a lot of people that might look at this year's production and be like, okay, CD's clearly not where he was last year. Last year was clearly the outlier. I might be able to sell CD. I promise you, if you don't think CD's being sold at even a slight discount, you should be sending feelers for him because I can tell you right now, there are going to be impatient fantasy owners with somebody who drafted him in the first or second round of their fantasy drafts, and there's probably going to be an opportunity to get him at a lower price than normal.
Yeah, I completely agree. And honestly, there may be another week where CeeDee Lamb has some disappointing production, again, playing New England's defense. But if that's the case, that's just all the more reason to capitalize on probably what is going to be a discounted CeeDee Lamb when you're looking at some of the other wide receivers around the league that are producing with just better, more friendly matchups right now. Cowboys have a lot to figure out, just like every other NFL team right now has a lot of things to figure out. And I think you're going to see a lot of things even out. The waters are going to settle, and we're going to realize again that CeeDee Lamb is one of those top assets that you're going to want come the end of the season.
Yeah, 100% agree. You got the next guy.
Next guy we're going to have here is Josh Jacobs. And obviously he's had an incredibly slow start to this season, but a slow start for Josh Jacobs still means a lot of volume. So he's still put up 9 points, 9 points, and 11 points, respectively, in the last 3 games or the first 3 games of the season. And when you look at what he did in 2022, he had a slow start. Same thing, 8 points, 9 points, and 14 points to begin 2022. I think at this point, you just are trying to back off a little bit on saying that Josh Jacobs is a bust. Let's please not do that, okay? There's a reason that fantasy football ends week 17 and not week 3. We're not taking, no one should be taking victory laps on Josh Jacobs saying that he's a bust and that he sucks and this is why he was going lower than other people thought he should have. Like, we were big believers in Josh Jacobs. All of us have a lot of shares of Josh Jacobs in our fantasy and best ball leagues. It doesn't look amazing now, but honestly, I'm still very confident in that situation and his ability from his volume alone and even his target share. I mean, he had 9 targets in week 2. That was all of his points in week 2. That's really encouraging as you see him begin to pick it up. I mean, you're talking about a running back that missed training camp, guys. He missed the entirety of the offseason because of his holdout. Then he finally caved, and he was ready to go week 1. This is just what happens at the beginning of the season. 12 targets through 3 games is awesome, okay? That's really, really good. This has helped Miles Sanders, and Miles Sanders is a way less impressive talent. Josh Jacobs is going to pick it up. We're very, very confident in it, and we are certain that you can get him at a discount right now in fantasy.
And he was priced reasonably in the first place, so if you're complaining, there could have been way worse options, like right next to him in Najee Harris.
Yes.
Yeah. And another option that was kind of going in a similar range is Calvin Ridley. And, you know, same thing you could be saying, people aren't selling Calvin Ridley low, but I have a feeling they are because he started off hot and there were a lot of questions with him to begin with, and now he's disappointed the last 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks, he's still 12th in the NFL in targets. He has 26 targets, right? So he's still being one of those hyper targeted receivers. I mean, that's how you got to say it, I guess. But really, I think there's a lot that has to do with Trevor Lawrence in this situation. In the last 2 games, Trevor Lawrence has thrown the ball 81 times. In those 81 times, he's only had 1 touchdown. So I don't think that's going to be expected of Trevor Lawrence. I mean, CJ Stroud has thrown the ball that many times, and he's thrown for more touchdowns. And I think definitely at this point in his career, Trevor Lawrence is still better than CJ Stroud. So you got to expect both of them to get back on the same page. And that offense, they've struggled the last few weeks. I mean, struggled against the Texans. No one expected that, but against the Chiefs. So they're going to get back on track. They're going to start scoring touchdowns again. And I think Calvin Ridley especially is going to start producing again when you get that volume and when you're a talented wide receiver. I think, yes, he's wide receiver 34 right now. He's still getting wide receiver 1 volume, 12th highest targeted wide receiver in the league. And I think he's going to settle it somewhere back in the middle. Maybe you're not getting the wide receiver 15 price tag you spent on him, but right now I think you can get a discount with people who are panicking, thinking he might not be ready to play again.
If you're looking back at week 2 when the Jags were held to only 9 points against Kansas City, there were 2 late game red zone target or end zone targets that Calvin Ridley got. He just wasn't able to haul in either of those. And if he gets one of those, this is a completely different story with Calvin Ridley.
Yeah,
and
people
he's
aren't
not in
freaking.
this video. And I think we're just saying here, because Avery and I are notably lower on Calvin Ridley than Simon is currently. And I think the reason we were lower even going into the season is we knew that he was probably going to start, at least for the first quarter of the season, pretty slow. And at least in the first 2 of 3 weeks at the beginning of the season, he has started pretty slow.
Yep.
But with that, again, we always say this, you play fantasy football for the end of the season. And when you're looking at a team like the Jaguars, who last season started 2-6 and then made a playoff run and won their division, like that's probably the same situation that you're looking at this year again. And honestly, for Calvin Ridley to have a bounce back week this week against the Atlanta Falcons secondary, which is notably worse than their run defense, like this could be the game where Ridley gets back on track.
Yeah, and a caveat to that would probably be if people are going to sell him at week 1 price, because there were a lot of people after week 1 saying, okay,
top 5, yeah.
Calvin Ridley maybe should have been a top 5 fantasy pick this year. So
Yeah.
if you're going to sell him at that price, then we're not buying Calvin Ridley. We still do
Correct.
think there's some risk associated with Calvin Ridley.
Yes.
But again, if people are going to look at the last 2 games and be short-sighted, that's when you're selling for a guy like Calvin Ridley because of the upside he brings on a week-to-week basis. You saw it in week 1. He's not always going to have 5 and 7 points. I mean, there are going to be games he has 20 or more points because it's Calvin Ridley. And we always, even when we were low on him, we knew he had that talent. So even if we're not sold on him completely, you still know the talent you're buying into. It's Calvin Ridley, like we all saw it.
Yeah, there really should be an asterisk on every single one of these buys in this video, and it's for the right price. These guys are buys for the right price. This isn't going to apply to every single one of your leagues. If you're going to go in our comments and say Calvin Ridley absolutely is not a buy because they want such and such for Calvin Ridley in my league. Okay, well, your league is not everyone else's league. And I guarantee you that there are some leagues out there that are short-sighted and they see the last 2 weeks of Calvin Ridley's production. They look at game logs and they say Calvin Ridley sucks.
There are plenty of those. And if you play in home leagues especially, James Conner is
Yes.
going to be the next guy on our list. He is the RB8 right now, which I think this maybe calls for double knuckle because we
Double knucks.
have tons.
He's
of-
my most owned player in best ball.
He's maybe my third mess. I mean, like
Yeah.
we own so much James Conner. And yes, you may say, okay, he's the RB8. How is he a buy low? But this happened with Raheem Mostert. We put Raheem Mostert as a buy low, and everybody's like, how?
So high.
He's a sell, he's a sell, he's a sell. And then after reading 150 comments that Raheem Mostert was a sell, I'm like, maybe that's why he's a buy. Does that make sense? James Conner, you might get some people in the comments that say James Conner is a sell high right now. He's on a bad offense. He's old. This is not new for James Conner. Look at his splits last year when Kyler Murray was out. In the last 6 weeks of the season, he was a top 12 running back.
19 points per game over his last 9 performances.
So with James Conner, this is not something that it's like, oh, this is a pleasant surprise. We planned on this. It's happening. We could ring the gong, but we're not going to. But we could. And now he's a buy low because, again, people are going to take the old, bad running back approach to this. He's not being priced like the running back one he is. He's the same as Raheem Mostert. People are like, should I sell Raheem Mostert? I'm like, if people want to pay top 5 producing running back prices for him, yeah, absolutely you do. The problem is people aren't, and people are not doing that with James Conner. I mean, either. Legitimately, he's gotten more efficient as his career has gone on, which is just unheard of. And the season's not over, but we're probably going to be ringing this gong once it's all said and done. So we're gonna wait. Again, it's been 3 weeks, and we aren't like Twitter idiots and victory lap after 1 week. And we are going to wait. But with James Conner, again, if you have somebody who is willing to let him go for even a running back 2 price, absolutely pouncing on
That's
that.
at least fair, right?
Absolutely, yes. I love James Conner. I love him. He's going to win us some money this year, boys. All right,
Yeah, I completely agree.
next
Yeah.
guy.
Our next guy that we're going to have here is Zay Flowers. And you know who's right behind Calvin Ridley with 25 targets? Well, I already told you it's Zay Flowers. That's right. Zay Flowers. I said it for the third time. The clear wide receiver one and likely the number one target, yes, we are going to say over Mark Andrews because he's out-targeted over the last 2 weeks, Mark Andrews, 15 targets to 13 targets. And at wide receiver 25 right now, the guy is still new to the league, and he's going to get better and better as the season goes along. We said that Zay Flowers was a must-start against the Colts this past week, and even though he didn't score as many points as we thought maybe his ceiling was, he still was absolutely flexible, and you felt fine putting him in your lineup, and he did deliver for you. So that was a real nice start that he had there against the Indianapolis Colts secondary. I think you got to see that continue, again, as the season progresses, as he continues to develop as a rookie wide receiver, guys. He's already doing this in his first 3 games in the NFL. I think at this point in fantasy, like just a little bit of a side note, when you're looking in the future to future classes for rookie wide receivers, I think you got to be looking for them to be pushed up draft boards because we're now getting into an era in the NFL where wide receivers are producing right off the bat.
Yep.
And not even just first round talents, like Tank Dell level talents in the 3rd round. Josh Downs. Like the list could go on and on. Puka Nacua. Like, are you serious?
Yeah.
But this is the world we live in now, I guess, in the NFL and in fantasy football. So Zay Flowers was absolutely of great value that you were getting in the offseason, and it's already paying off in the first 3 weeks of the season.
Just wait till the last 3.
I know. It's going to be awesome.
Yep.
All right.
Next, we have someone who a lot of you might not guess. It's Michael Pittman. Okay, you're going to do it. And, I mean, all of you, if I were to ask you to guess on who's leading the NFL in targets right now, you have the obvious ones. You have Puka Nacua right there at the top, Keenan Allen, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Michael Pittman, which a lot of people didn't expect. Michael Pittman was being drafted at some point in the offseason.
Whoa.
Wide receiver 38.
I know 3... No,
Well,
2 and a half. 2.5 guys who suspected that Michael Pittman might get 10, 11 targets.
I never expected Michael Pittman would be producing as a wide receiver 1, but here he is. And there's a lot of people, just like we were just saying with James Conner, they're saying sell high on Michael Pittman. Well, guess what? If they're selling high on Michael Pittman, they're not expecting that they get that wide receiver 1. They're wanting to sell him for a wide receiver 2 price. I'm going to buy him for that, and I'm going to hope that he's at least going to perform at that level, if not continuing to do what he is already doing. He has 34 targets, 25 receptions, 230 yards, and a touchdown so far in this season, right? He's not going to keep doing that every week in and week out, but I think there's a pretty good chance that he has 2 or 3 bad games this season.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
That's going to
absolutely.
happen, and then people are going to get really low on him. There's your opportunity to buy. And whether you do that week in and week out, are you selling Keenan Allen right now because he had 20 targets yesterday? No, because he has that volume. He's going to keep producing. Well, I'm going to make the same argument with Michael Pittman here. When you have a guy getting the volume, he's obviously the number 1 target in that offense. Keep buying him. There's really no point in selling high on a guy that gets volume.
When we're
in my
looking for the
opinion.
markers of a receiver that we want to have in PPR leagues, again, we are looking at the targets. And with Michael Pittman, he's done a very good job of getting targets. It doesn't get much more clear-cut than that. I mean, touchdowns are volatile, very, very volatile.
And he's only had one.
Yards are volatile. Michael Pittman has 1 touchdown, and he's producing as a wide receiver 1. Those are the guys. Those are the guys in PPR leagues.
What's not volatile is his volume. And he did it last season, and he's doing it again this year, so there's no reason for it to stop.
And nobody expected Anthony Richardson to throw the ball as many times as he is.
That was a big part of it.
Even we were a little bit surprised about how much he threw the ball in week 1.
Yeah.
But still, it plays into our point. Miles Sanders is going to be last year. So let's talk. Miles Sanders, he's looked bad on the ground. Totally understand it. He's got to have volume, right? Over the past 3 games, 18 carries, down to 14, down to 9 carries. But let's look at his targets. The targets are going to tell a different story. Targets are another less volatile stat that, like you saw in the Josh Jacobs instance. Wow, Josh Jacobs instance.
Happens.
Yep. It can prop up a running back from a production standpoint and give some consistency. 6, 5, and 9 targets. That means he's had 20 targets in 3 games. 20.
Dang.
In 3 games, Sanders has as many targets as he did in 17 games in 2022 on the Eagles. He got 20 targets, or less than 20 targets.
He literally had 20 targets in 17 games.
20 targets.
Last season.
Can we pause here too? Who in the YouTube space would have ever predicted this in the offseason for Miles Sanders to get an uptick in receiving usage?
It wasn't me. That's a hint. It wasn't me.
It was the dynasty domain and the fantasy domain.
Yeah,
so
whatever.
yeah, no, that's
The domain.
this is something that he showcased his rookie year. And we knew it was there because he even had a little bit of it his second year as well. But you saw just the way the Eagles' offense kind of morphed and changed with Jalen Hurts. He was just less valuable for that offense. And then going into the Panthers' offense this season, we were like, hey, this could be really important for Bryce Young as he's developing. And now that Andy Dalton's in this offense, which we said that was going to bode really well for the fantasy assets for the next couple of weeks, and it has, at least for the first week of Andy Dalton starting. So that was really fun to see Miles Sanders have a solid game.
And you would think as the offense gets better and as the year goes on, that offense will get more efficient. Miles Sanders will get more efficient as
absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
Although it is a Frank Reich offense, so you never know. It could get worse.
That is absolutely true.
That is the end of our video today. Do us a huge favor. Make sure you drop a like on this video and make sure you're also subscribed. If you have issues or if you have a great fantasy team, doesn't matter, and you want a personalized team podcast for your fantasy team to help you with your strategy for the rest of the season, flockfantasy.com/domain is the place to be. If you use code domain and select the Mother Flocker tier, you'll get 30% off. First of all, for using code domain, you'll get in our camp, and we will give you that personalized team podcast. We can help you do a lot of things with your fantasy team. So like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. Use code domain for 30% off. Thanks, guys, for joining us. We'll see you later.